Okay, let's get started. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everybody. And I'd like to start by kindly reminding you all that this session, with your kind permission, is being recorded. So if you wish to be anonymous, please de-identify yourself on Zoom when it is the time to go in Q&A. My name is Daria Loi, and I respectfully acknowledge the land onto which I live and work, and I am on right now, which rests on the traditional homeland of the Anthropocentric people and the Confederate tribes of Grand Ronde, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging, for the continuing culture and the contribution that they make to the life of our community, now and in the past. I will be your facilitator for this session. My name is Daria Loi, and I'm very excited to get started with this panel. Next slide, please. Before we do that, I would like to remind us all of our guidelines for being together. So let's review them briefly. So first of all, let's be kind and mindful of our differences and be patient with technical difficulties that sometimes happen. Let's enter the space with the spirit of listening deeply and participate with respect. This is a webinar, so, you know, except for the panelists and the people on the call that are participating directly, your microphones are already muted, but do remember also kind of the same type of etiquette in the chat. Be careful with your choice of words and you know, and how you express yourself in the language. Let's be inclusive in our action, in our words. Don't judge or trivialize others or use, you know, phrases that, you know, do not focus on critiquing respectfully and providing constructive advice. Let's avoid generalization as much as we can. And, you know, let's anchor our perspectives in direct experiences or personal observations. I already asked for your permission to record the sessions. Again, I remind you to please make yourself anonymous if you wish to de-identify yourself on Zoom. And do please, I invite you to acknowledge your traditional custodians of the lands onto, you know, which you reside right now, on which you are right now while you're attending. And you can use the Zoom chat box for that. Thank you. Next slide, please. And now, next slide, please. Okay. And now I would really like to welcome our fantastic panelists. Some are old friends, some are new friends, and they're all wonderful humans. I'm very excited about this. I'm very excited to get an opportunity to learn from all of them. We had a couple of meetings to discuss different perspectives, and I know that this session is going to be fantastic because we're going to be able to learn from each other and from their own amazing perspective. Just quick reminder, this is Beyond Academia. We are focusing on the tensions between anthropocentric and ecocentric perspective. Of course, we are in a participatory design environment and context that we're exploring here. And I asked to Marion, to Penny, and to Jan-Christophe to start us off with a story that tells us a little bit about their experiences, the direct experiences in a beyond academia environment of what it means to do participation within the context of this session topic, and to focus perhaps on stories that are more about not the wonderful things that happen when everything goes right and perfect and by plan, but focus more on the areas where maybe things didn't go to plan, maybe things, you know, had a bit of hiccups, maybe there were problems, maybe they have to redirect the course of events because the original planning couldn't work the way they anticipated, and to really focus on what they did, the learning from those experiences and what we can glean from the learning and how do we recover when things don't go, when we try to do participatory practice, when things don't go in the right direction, let's say. So I asked her to, we're going to start with Marion. She's going to share her story. Then we're going to move to Jan-Christophe. Then we're going to move to Penny. So each of them is going to have a few minutes to tell us about their stories. And then after that, we're going to have a part of the session where they will start reflecting onto each other contribution and asking questions to each other. And in the end, we'll open it up for Q&A from all attendees. So without continuing listening to my voice that is not that interesting, nor saying anything particularly profound, I really am excited to get started. And I again thank you so much, our panelists, for their amazing contribution and for their patience, also different time zones. And so shall we start? Maybe Marion, you were sharing with us some amazing stories the other day. Would you like to share with everyone else your perspectives and inspirational stories, please?
Thanks, Daria, and it's great to be here. So I'll do a little bit introduction to myself and then share some sort of provocations and experiences from some recent work. And I guess I'm sharing these because we've tried something, and it'd be awesome to hear from other panelists how you may have tackled the same challenges or similar ones, because nothing's ever the same in these contexts. So yeah, I really like the title of this session, Anthropocentric and Ecocentric tensions, and I can't help but thinking the word eccentric really fits in there. So I'll need to caveat this session with saying I'm actually a textile designer. I come from a world of materials where everything's very tangible, and my real interest is in bringing things together, not just people, but kind of experiences, memories, objects. So with some of the work I do might appear somewhat eccentric, especially in the circumstances in which I'm doing it, which for now is UK government. So I'm working in a policy setting. So yeah, my background is as a designer, and my main job, my aims are about bringing lived experiences into policy making. And the recent work I've been doing is focused on rural communities. So in the UK, that's often farming communities, but not only, can be very remote settings. And so I've worked with people in schools, with families, with farmers, and it's really about bringing different methods into the kind of government setting. And for now, I'm working on co-design practices. So thinking about the ecocentric, some of the work I'm doing is looking at the future of the environment. How do we design policies that can help future stewardship, how look after the land, think about the wildlife? And I've also been working in kind of anthro space of broadband, which could be somewhat opposite. It's about connections, which is then about community, it's about work, it's about people, it's about families. And these two things can seem very disparate, but actually we really need these two things to work together, because there's something called diversity, which we all really need in countryside. And it's not just about kind of bringing more people in, but it's thinking like who else might like to be able to be part of this stewardship of future land, and thinking about how do we, yes, increase rural population, but how do we encourage families to join? We change the picture of what rural countryside experiences and society actually might look like today. So yeah, a big part of my job is, I suppose, thinking about policymakers who may be in the government setting, in nice offices, say in London, to get out of their mind that the countryside is this idyllic space where you can have a digital detox. So a lot of the work I've been doing is co-design at the moment with farmers. And I just want to share 3 experiences as kind of provocations. So the first one is we've been doing a lot of online co-design workshops with farming communities and policymakers. And we've had some situations where we very much welcome people to come in and be themselves. And then we've had sort of individuals from external to the policymaker setting who have taken over the show. They've become very angry. They started to blame the policymaker who's very much doing their job as the convener or the facilitator. And we realized that we were sort of putting our colleagues at risk. This is upsetting for them, and it was exhausting them. So something we did was we worked on a code of conduct. So this is an activity which the co-design group can actually develop together, kind of what we saw similar at the beginning of this session. So I guess the question is here, did we forget to do that at the beginning? It seems quite obvious. So how do we not forget in the future? Second, we'll rush through. We've had issues with co-design people coming together, working on ideas, and then at the last minute, minister saying, do you know what, scrap this, I already know what I want to do. And it's really upsetting when you've invested all your time and your energy into something you really believe in. So we've kind of tried to alleviate this by doing kind of retros. We've got feedback, and we're thinking like, how do we move this into best practice for the future? I suppose the question is here, that did we not listen, and who didn't we listen to? So moving forward, how do we listen? I'm in a government space, so I get dangled this word assurance. How are you making sure that the co-design practices are measurable and smart? It's not in my practice to start measuring people. So I do have a very simple kind of spectrum you might call it a graph if you want. And on one side it says, is this a tick box exercise? And on the other side it says, no, this feels good. I feel like I'm really including people. And that's what I've been asking my co-design teams. Where are you sitting? Do you feel good, or do you feel like you're just doing something you're being paid to do? And it's really up to the people who are getting involved to share how they feel that they're actually including people, being transparent, thinking about sharing power, and all the other wonderful things that participatory engagements can bring to policymaking, if given the chance. That's me.
Thank you, Marion. That was wonderful. I really love this moment of stopping, and reflecting on the ticking boxes versus do you really feel it in your heart, right? It's like such an important moment and ability to do that. Jan-Christophe, would you like to continue this journey and tell us a little bit about your experiences, please?
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm Jan-Christophe Zoels, partner at Ecocentric and also now head of the MA design program at the University of Lucerne. I'm calling in right now from an island in Maine near Portland, Aotearoa. I think very much the people who made this land to what it is, the native bands of the area who have been in possession and have been pushed out of possession for so many centuries. Thank you. I want to talk today about the story which I experienced in my role at Experienza, and that's now some years ago. I had the chance with a wonderful team of collaborators working on an urban planning project in Helsinki, Finland, and it was called low to no carbon. Low to no is the idea really to arrive in urban planning with a carbon zero agenda across the infrastructure, across the building to become, across the retail infrastructure, but across also the behavioral change aspects. And so the team which I had worked there together was a team from Arup. Arup are fantastic climate engineers, building engineers, very, very smart, very, very dedicated to new ideas and carbon neutral solutions, a fantastic group of architects, and Sitra from Helsinki in Finland, who were actually the client managing this process. And as our task as Experienza was essentially to manage the whole stakeholder engagement and participatory and co-creation design process and facilitate also the behavioral change aspects of this project. And one of the things which we were tasked with was to essentially build an understanding of what are the changes to happen if we want to build a low to no carbon infrastructure and building environment. And what would this mean? And so we did over 150 different interviews, workshops with a wide variety of different participants, like usual, from the different people involved in the city government and state government to the housewives organization to various people which we plan to bring into the design aspects for the retail, to the commercial spaces, to the housing associations, etc., etc. And so we had all these fantastic recommendations what are coming out of these different workshops, as well as of the scientific advisors and the expert sessions of what we could do. And one of the parts was really going towards energy neutrality, and the best way to provide the energy was to provide essentially an off-the-shore wind farm, which would provide the energy for this building district of 30,000 people. Now, offshore, and this is now a project which is built, low to no, it's called Jätkäsaari in Airut in Helsinki. but the planning stages were really starting over 10 years ago. Now, offshore wind at that time was still a relatively new discussion. And so one thing which we run into that this fantastic scientific and expert advice which came in and was even positively feedbacked as a way of generating energy fell into some trouble. And essentially the trouble was that the proposed placement for this offshore wind park, offshore the islands in the coast of Helsinki, fell into the problem that some politician and some important people had their summer places there. And so there was a very strong indirect feedback, not in my backyard. Please don't plan this kind of offshore wind park in front of our summer residences. And so some of these things which we just simply didn't have planned to. So what were the problems from my perspective? We had a very big vision, which we tried to engage the people in the process with, make them part of the solution, but the scenarios weren't played down to this level of the inhabitants and the residents of these far-flung islands in front of the building site and how they would actually respect or respond to it and what were their concerns. I was a little bit blue-eyed that in our process of inclusion and participatory process that we would get people into this science-based and expert recommended best practices and recommendation, and that we could help to convince them. We were probably not inclusive enough in our original invitation to the participants, focusing really on the typical participants on location, which we were dealing with, but not in this case with the more distributed systemic participants of the solution space, which we proposed a little bit farther ahead. And I think the third problem was trying to build an argument in a society which very much favors a joint process and the joint decision-making process, that that not all participants were included, were invited, but also that we didn't manage this process from the beginning to also gain access to the top decision-making levels, which had some part in this decision. Now, at the end, we were successful with the solution, not with this particular energy provisioning, but we found alternative ways from intensive photovoltaic installations to and super insulated and other building solutions to addressing these kind of energy aspect. But our biggest contribution at the end was then in working with the residents on location around more behavior change solution, from the amount of parking spaces to offering contracts, who wants to participate in car sharing, to new retail spaces, etc., to really decarbonizing the building infrastructure in itself. But this big veil outside the offshore wind park never came to fruition. But thanks, short story.
Thank you, Jan-Christophe. Not in my backyard. That was such a powerful sentence. When you said it, just gave me like, it reminded me of many moments. Yes, thank you so much. Penny, share with us your stories, please.
Sure, kia ora. Well, I'll just start by introducing myself also. So he Pākehā hau ko Penny Hagen taka ingoa. I am in Auckland, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I am Pākehā, which means I'm a descendant of white settlers here. Where I'm sitting right now is in Te Tātua Aria Kiuta, which is otherwise known as Three Kings, and it's a place that was a very busy intersection for many of the first settlers here in Tāmaki. So to acknowledge the mana whenua that whakapapa to this land here that I sit on is Ngāti Tiata, Kawarawa Maki, Te Akiti, Waiahua, Ngātai, Tāmaki, and Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei all have lineage and significant connection back to this land. So I live somewhere that's a very rich and beautiful space, and you can tell because it has a lot of history and folks that connect to it. So greetings from Aotearoa to all our panelists today, and thank you for having us. I'm lucky enough to be the Director Tangata Tiriti of the Auckland Co-Design Lab, which means I'm in a shared leadership model with Tangata Whenua. So I represent that leadership model represents our treaty process and legislation that we have as Pākehā and Māori as the First Peoples here. So that's a significant thing for us to reflect that in our leadership. And I'll circle back to that at the end of my story. So just sort of building on a little bit some of the things that Marion raised, and I'll look forward to digging into some of your story too, Jan-Christophe, when we get into the questions. But mine's sort of a meta reflection of a discomfort around co-design and participatory design and what that sort of meant in place and connected to the place where I come from and practice now. And our work is dedicated to equity and intergenerational wellbeing. We're a public innovation and learning team inside the public sector. So we work with public servants and community to try and shift the system for greater equity. And when we first started, our focus was very much, it's the co-design lab. And so I'm sort of interchanging that with participatory design because that's the terminology that gets used here. And it was really about doing co-design projects that brought together all parts of the system to tackle complex issues and also to build the capability of the public sector in co-design. And so it was very great intense, but very process, tools and methods focused in terms of like, here's this great new methodology and it's going to magically grapple with complex issues that have been built over, sort of centuries. And we did some work that, would have had, lots of good things come out of it. And I don't want to undermine that, but I increasingly was feeling uncomfortable that that wasn't really helpful in addressing inequity or looking at intergenerational wellbeing, to be doing these kind of project-based method capability building type processes. And this is especially true, as I know others have the same experience, but in the last 5 years, co-design has become the overwhelming thing that government likes to use. It's, sort of a popular methodology. It sits alongside other methodologies. And yet, is government really capable of the power sharing that's inherently inferred by participatory design or co-design? And we were definitely finding that that wasn't the case. So we might be supporting a team to do co-design, but actually when it came down to it, was there power sharing? Was it possible to rethink scope? Was it possible to stretch the time to give the relationships that were actually needed for change to happen? And increasingly that it became clear that those things were in conflict, and we might be able to do the project and maybe come up with wonderful outputs, but that wouldn't necessarily have any relationship to change, to that being taken up. And it didn't get into the structural underpinnings of why the inequities were in place in the first place. It didn't grapple with the issues of colonization or structural racism that are kind of the basis of lots of the inequity issues that co-design was being applied to. And so in fact, co-design then was risking becoming a colonizing tool in and of itself, because it was sort of dressed up consultation. It appeared to be power sharing, but wasn't really. And this is of course not in all cases, but it's really problematic actually as an approach in my context, which is really ironic because we've still got that name, Co-Design Lab, but and so it risks in fact entrenching the status quo and kind of parachuting people in for an apparent opportunity to participate, but participate on these terms. And in fact, it's, I think, started to become a way of looking like we were doing something without actually doing something. And so our response to that, and sort of in a way feeling compromised, was to, in some cases, stop doing it altogether, give others the courage to say, no, actually, we don't have the conditions. So like Marion, if you're just doing a tick box, should we really be doing it? If let's stop and have a look at that and have the courage to say no, just because there really aren't the conditions. It's not, you're wasting people's time. And what we've started to do instead is really lean into building the capabilities to do with understanding and holding complexity, holding the really big picture while still thinking about the project, rather than saying big picture too complex. I have to stick with my scope. So being able to hold those tensions, grapple with, for us, what it means to come to terms with the history of colonization, the power, particularly as Pākehā or white New Zealanders, and how that is displayed in everyday action all the time through government. Like, that's the basis of government. So how do you start to see the patterns at the very core as opposed to the edges where the projects are, and creating space for people to grapple with that side of the work, the kind of core side of it. So we've said, no more methods and processes, back to foundational practices, starting in values, starting in culture. And for us, that really means starting in connection to place. So if we don't understand the place, the environment, the history of place, the stories of place and what have gone on there, it doesn't matter how good your policy looks like. it's landing in a vacuum. So it's kind of gone from process and method to actually we have to think about everything, but think about everything in the context to place and where we are and the history of where we are. And how to help. So maybe if there's a provocation in there, it's about helping the policy teams that we work with think at the population level, but be able to do that in a way that's connected to place. And that it normally feels like a real tension to get to the specificity of place and land and environment. In particular places, we're so used to working in the kind of aggregate. So yeah, that's my kind of, I guess, discomfort story. And for me, the only way we've been able to do that really meaningfully, and it's important to acknowledge from my perspective, is the cultural leadership of Indigenous practitioners in my team who have stepped into that space and helped navigate what it actually looks like to leave behind some of those processes and tools and start in place and start in culture and in values. And hence how important it is for me to be in a shared leadership model that reflects that cultural relationship and the dynamic. And we're just learning our way into that. So we haven't solved any of that stuff, but we've gone, that thing doesn't work so well for us. What might work better? Yeah, and that's me. Hilda.
As I listen to all your stories, I'm just thinking about, I just wanted to express, how grateful I feel, like, because I know that to share what all of you shared, it takes a lot of vulnerability and courage and generosity. And I think it's easier to talk about when things work wonderful by the plan, but it is much more complex and it takes much more courage, right, to reflect when things don't, and when you do feel a discomfort. So I'm really grateful for the courage and the generosity. And I wonder, like, I saw a lot of nodding, as when Marion was talking, like I just saw all of you nodding to each other and kind of taking notes. And so I'd like to open it up to some reflection on what you heard from your co-panelists, reflection or questions that you may have. Who would like to get started? Yeah, looks like maybe you want to get started. Can I call on you? Looks like you have got something coming out.
Yeah, Marion, you started with the question of the code of conduct, and I think Penny, you clearly also talked about cultural leadership, etc., etc. How do you actually go about to build a more inclusive and more already participatory code of conduct from the beginning to avoid some of these problems which you as well as Penny described so eloquently?
Yeah, I feel like I could answer it from the very edges of the problems. Penny maybe could contribute to the seeing the problem in the first place. So practically, when we're kind of setting up these workshops or these occasions for people to come together, we've come up with, and we think it's okay, a methodology where we together, like we did at the beginning with Daria's, Daria showed a list of ideas of things that we might be able to agree to make this session somewhat inclusive and friendly. In the way that we're having policy makers to do this right now is we produce a blank one of those and then we build it together during the session. So anyone has an opportunity to add in something that they feel is important to them, whether it's about language or something simple like turning your camera on or not. So everyone can feel like they're contributing. I'm saying everyone as if everyone's there really equally giving the exact minute of their time. We still have those problems, but that's one way that we're addressing some of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want me to respond to that too?
Yeah,
Yes,
is there a
please.
way how to connect the code of conduct also to the cultural leadership that you addressed earlier on?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very similar process to what Marion described. Here it draws on a Māori term, which is kawa, and that is led out by Māori practitioners, but it's it's got a very deep meaning. When it comes into this space, it is very much about what is the thing that will hold us in safety, so and in cultural safety, but also accountable to the space and to the purpose of the space that people, are coming together to work on. So that we build that over time, and we use that as part of the it's the definition of rigor for us, and it's the definition of good. So it's what keeps the relationships sound, and then it helps also whatever is kind of defined as that kawa or code of conduct. It also is understood as the baseline for how we'll measure some of the outcomes. Not measure, I don't really ever measure, but track is the word I use instead. Because whatever we've defined as the thing that's going to guide the work is then has to show up in the practices and in the ways that we say something is successful. So those things connect together from our perspective because they're led from a cultural context and their values connected, which is as much, from my observation, that Indigenous leadership practices and practitioners are already starting there. It's the non-Indigenous practitioners that we often use values very lightly, as opposed to being the constantly active in all our actions. And so we say, how is that showing up? What does it look like to experience that today? How are we seeing that? Yeah.
Any more reflections or questions for each other?
I have a more general question. The session here is called Anthropocene versus Ecocentric point of views. How do we give voice to the nature, the planet, the the nature which don't have a traditional voice in our participatory processes or in our decision-making processes? How do we get topics like biodiversity addressed from a non-human-centric point of view, or more than human-centric point of view? How do we get that into the discussion?
I think that's for you, Mary.
So I suppose looking to our academic colleagues, I've seen loads of absolutely wonderful examples of kind of projects and workshops where us humans take on personas of animals or the land, future generations. I'm going to say I don't have the answers, but I am trying with my designer hat in the place which is I'm working with public servants, and I'm asking them, you're designing the future of hedges, and hedges are a real serious policy issue. And I've tried to ask, like, you know, what does the insect say on this? And yeah, you know what? They're laughing at me because they're like, well, what is she asking us? But I think as long as I keep trying and keep kind of showing really good examples of where others, perhaps in academia and other places, are kind of using methodology to think about the more than human, there will be a space. So my secret weapon, Penny, I was going to ask you about your secret weapons too. My secret weapon at the moment is I've organized a kind of guerrilla design studio, which happens every 2 weeks. Everybody's welcome, and we try out some of these different methods, and it's a very safe space to think, okay, what would design look like from the perspective of a rock, or however that looks. So it's kind of an opportunity for these somewhat more unusual methods to come into play, and whether civil servants and everyone else wants to take that forward into their practices, I can only hope, and I'm here to support. But yeah, it's definitely new territory for me there.
I've been looking at questions that are coming in the chat, and I have one question from Joyce. Hey, Joyce, to Penny. And so the question is, did you raise question from the powers to be on why you were refusing to do what you were supposed to do? And did they respond positively? And how did you also encourage other teams to do so?
Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, so I guess it doesn't feel like it wasn't that adversarial, but partly because it's occurred over time. So there's a relationship building that I feel like we're really privileged to be able to do. So we've been going for 5 years. So the trend, you know, the kind of connecting and relationship building inside and outside of government for people to be able to work with us in different ways. One of the things is that people understand that what we're doing right now isn't going to get us where we need to go. You know, there's an overwhelming understanding that the approaches to equity that have been applied for the last 40 years have probably only led to making it worse. So people do have, there is a willingness for doing something differently. So that helps as context. But also, you know, and sometimes it's sort of indisputable when someone comes and says, oh, we want to do a co-design project. And I'm like, let's just stop and think about how much we already know about this thing, and would it make sense to go back out and do more? Or is it just really time for us to action what has already been learnt? And so taking people into that space and saying, look, which is, I mean, it felt funny at first because, you know, we spent so long convincing people that they needed to talk to people, and now we're like, actually, we've talked to people so much, and we've got such a strong picture of what the issues are, particularly in traumatic spaces, and sensitive spaces, that our obligation now is to act on that and involve people in that action and move into implementation as the work that we do, not in a collaborative, participatory way, not just the stuff that can get stuck after the kind of learning or the proposition space. So I guess it's been a gentle refusal that people have felt like they could participate in, and in some other cases, it's where folks have felt the dissonance. Is that right? Where they're like, I know this doesn't feel right because I know, you know, I'm being told I should do this approach, but I know that we're going to get out there and we're not going to be able to be authentic or accountable to these communities in a way that I feel right about. And we're like, it's a thing to do, and just how, so they've already had that sense of disconnect themselves. So yeah, that would be my some thoughts on those questions.
You know, I saw here in the chat, there are also some reflections that I think would be useful to share, because I think they might actually prompt also more follow-ups from all of you. There is Andy, hey Andy, there is a comment from Andy about, you know, reflecting on when we were talking about how eco-design can be a decolonizing tool, right? You know, this is like a pretty strong and important observation. And, you know, and one of the reflection is, you know, which resonates with me greatly also, is looking like we're doing something without actually doing anything. The sense of like, you know, the ticking the boxes really. Another kind of reflection that I saw coming in was actually a longer reflection from Joyce, you know, talking about when you, Penny, I think you were talking about leaving the tools, the methods, and the process behind, you know, when you make that comment. And one of the reflections there is that is a very brave practice, but also leaves us vulnerable, especially in relation to questions that are raised, they were raised in yesterday exploratory paper session on ethics and values, designing with indigenous collectives, and about the role of the designer researcher when perceived as an expert by the community they work with, right? So this is kind of one of the reflections in relation to that. And then let's see. And Joyce is saying, thanks, Penny, I really appreciate you taking time to focus on building a relationship and trust and being brave to not needing to do any more and just action it. Something we can all learn from, is always really inspiring. Absolutely. You know, they don't want to lose all the wonderful quotes that came through. I wonder if we have any more questions now, as we're approaching towards the end of the hour, from unless there are more reflection and questions to each other. Of course, anytime you can please have them rolling, but if there is also encouraging maybe the audience to ask questions to the panelists, where we are lucky to have them with us for a few more minutes. So please do put them in the chat. And if not, then I might go, oh, hang on, actually, maybe there is a question that came through. If not, I might go actually back to some questions that you were asking to each other earlier on in our separate chat. But give me the chance to go back. I think that, Penny, you had a few question on the Q&A. I'm going a second. There are questions in the Q&A. Apologies. I completely did not see that. My apologies. So I've got a few questions here, actually, several from Andy. So one is, if external power centers are a problem, for example, funders, government, project sponsors, etc., how do you set a code of conduct for their behavior? Can you set that out when you first talk about engagement and you becoming involved? Who would like to maybe speak on this question that is at the top of the Q&A from Andy?
I'm happy to give our sort of angle on it and then hand over, because I feel like I've talked enough. I guess we're trying to get underneath that even further and say there's habits of government which generally look like we commission something out and then we watch whether or not it's successful or not, and, you know, ask for accountability back. What did you do with the money? Did you spend it well? And what we're trying to do is broaden that conversation and say, you're just, you know, government's just as accountable to whether that money was spent successfully or not. So how do we work about the questions and the tracking of accountability and success and outcomes, and have those as a shared thing? And so building government's capability to see themselves as actors and influencers of that successful process, rather than just I give the money and then I watch whether you know, kind of fail or successful, but I don't take any responsibility for whether I've set the conditions for those things or not. That's a long game. So that's a little bit each time, just trying to build that, like, oh, actually, no, you're in this. So not so much a code of conduct, but trying to invite government into what are the things that you'll ask yourselves each week about how this is going and how you've contributed to it and participated. So we're trying to create a more active learning environment that involves everybody in the process, and that's totally a journey for policy and policy management and commissioning teams to see themselves in that role too.
Okay, there is another question again for for all of you really. So any one of you that feels inclined to tackle it, please do. This is from Anne. It says, "Thank you for this panel. Very interesting insights. I have been hearing attention around policy and systemic change and local impact. As designer, how do you manage these in your work?" Which I think we heard already a fair bit of that. But if you have any more insights to share. How do you manage this tension between policy, systemic change, and local impact? Perhaps, Ian, your story related a fair bit also to this.
Yes. I think in our work, we are trying to really focus on prototyping regulations. So in this sense, trying to advance systemic change. But if we only come with a systemic change perspective and maybe some so-called expert views, we oftentimes negate, let's say, local insights, local stories, local cultural leadership, etc., etc., etc. And so trying to break the systemic approaches down into all these different small little details, small questions, small experience, past experiences, histories, which can then inform that certainly a better way to go about it. So how we, instead of coming in with the big proposals anymore, we are trying to work much more proactively in the collection of the very diverse solution spaces from the different participants, and trying to help them to build more joint and combined solution spaces into it. And sometimes then the question comes back to, what is the systemic impact of this individual or this smaller or this local or solution proposed, and how can we connect it back to the question at hand?
Thank you. Actually, I have a question that I really is very topical for just, someone that I mentor asked me something very similar, and I'd like to hear very much what your perspectives are on this. And this is a question from Andy, and he says, what would your advice be for junior researchers or junior staff with insecure positions in terms of holding their ground? What do you think? Ticking the boxes, or what do you think?
I feel like I've got loads of experience in this, so I could probably write a whole thesis. And it depends on where you are and all of those things. But I think some advice would be really to pick your battles. You're a designer, so you see problems. You probably can't solve them all. So choose one where you can do really well, find some allies to help you do it. And even if it's very small scale, I guess present how doing things in a designerly way can actually change even a small group of people's way of working. It could be your direct team. But yeah, find ways to do things on small scale that you feel safe doing, and then you get to change the world. But find the good people. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I often talk about it, like see it in the long game. You're doing two things. You're doing the project that you're doing now, but you're thinking about how things could be different. And so each project is an opportunity for building a slightly different starting point for next time, or a strengthened capacity or relationships, so don't feel like everything you have to try and shift everything in this one opportunity that you have now, but do maximize the opportunity you have to set yourself up. So, like long and short game, work in the parallel. And it is my experience that if you're trying to tackle anything systemic, you're doing at least 3 jobs at the same time. So you've got to do the thing that keeps people kind of happy and on board, and then do the other things and slowly create more and more space. But I do think it's a lifetime of work as opposed to like a project. How can I get it right?
I just realized, thank you, Sarah. I realized the question was junior researcher and not junior designer, and I kind of answered it as a designer. But I think some really good advice I got was, what do you mean when you say design? So maybe even in that case, what do you mean when you say research? And help people to understand that will help you to know what you're up to.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
For me, it's really find partners in the discussion, then hold your ground, be the provocative voice, holding us accountable to. And then also, I think research as well as design needs to be communicated. So how do you moderate this communication of the insights and make clear that everybody is heard? So and last but not least, also we need to check our biases in the process. So what's the bias beyond we hold our ground? Are you listening? Are you also listening to what the other people are saying in the process? But still, otherwise, I prefer having provocative voices in the team.
Thank you so much. I'm just looking at the clock, and unfortunately, we have got only a few minutes, left, and I have a couple of homeworks to get through before the session ends. I just want to reiterate how grateful I am for the time that you gave us today. I could stay here for another 3 or 4 hours, actually listening in and gleaning beautiful moments through your eyes, through your experiences. But for now, I just want to thank you so much to Marion and Penny and Jan-Christophe for sharing a piece of you, a piece of your experiences. I'm sure there will be many more questions may come, and I encourage the audience to reach out, right? If you wish to ask more and to get more insights, absolutely do that. What I need to do now is to share with all of you a couple of logistic bits, and so just for to orient yourself around the conference, we are on is for me 1 a.m. on the 24th. So we are officially in the 24th, and you can see that we've got a few more days of the hybrid before we enter in the face-to-face in the UK. Now, for today, day 6, the 24th, just remind you, the full paper session 6 for a time that is friendly for Europe, Africa, and Asia Pacific regions starts at 8:15 a.m. UTC, and then also the full paper session 7 and at 2 p.m. And then we have exploratory paper and parent tracks that are at 3 p.m. UTC. We've got 2 exploratory paper parent tracks at one is in session 8 and then session 9. And please do look, like these. Actually, thanks Joyce for putting the next paper session link. And please do engage with the community. Again, if you have questions for our panelists, I highly encourage you to reach out. And again, thank you so much to our panelists for a wonderful session, for your time, for your dedication, and more importantly, for your vulnerability, your generosity, and your courage. I really am extremely grateful to know that there are people such as yourself in the world. So thank you again, everyone, and thanks to the organizers. Nothing strange happened with the technology, so also thank you so much to everybody that does all the work in the back so that everything works well. And thanks for the questions too.